The classroom fell into a strange, buzzing silence as the door creaked open. At first, no one reacted. It wasn't unusual for people to peek into Westlake Conservatory's advanced performance class. It was one of the most exclusive in the country, after all. But when an elderly black man stepped into the room, the atmosphere shifted. Heads turned. Whispered comments began to stir the otherwise focused room. He looked out of place. While the students wore polished uniforms and carried instruments worth thousands, this man wore a faded navy cardigan over a white button-down, plain slacks, and scuffed shoes. A simple violin case hung at his side, aged and worn, like it had traveled through decades, and life, with him. Some students exchanged glances. Others looked away uncomfortably, pretending not to notice. One or two couldn't hold back their smirks. From the front of the room, Mr. Aldridge, the proud, silver-haired conductor-turned-teacher, looked up with barely masked irritation. He had seen it all, or so he liked to claim. Former lead violinist of a European symphony, now head of Westlake's elite strings division, Aldridge was revered for his discipline, and feared for his pride. "Excuse me," he said, his voice sharp and formal. "May I ask why you're here?" The old man stepped forward slowly, his eyes scanning the room, calm and quiet. "I'm here for the open masterclass," he said. "I was told it was open to the public." Aldridge raised one brow, then glanced at the violin case. He let out a small, amused scoff. "Yes, well, it's open for observation. We don't typically invite walk-ins to perform." The old man nodded once. "I understand. But I'd still like to play." Aldridge turned to his students, gesturing toward the guest like he was part of some spontaneous entertainment. "And you are?" "Henry Bell." Aldridge repeated the name to himself, as if trying to recall whether it had ever crossed his radar. It hadn't. "Well, Mr. Bell," he said, now smiling thinly, "you're welcome to take a seat and watch. But I don't think this is the right setting for auditions." "I'm not here to audition," Henry replied simply. "I'm here to share." The smile faded from Aldridge's face. "You brought your violin?" he asked, now openly amused. "Yes. You intend to play it here?" His tone was half laugh, half warning. "I do," Henry answered, unbothered. A few students chuckled under their breath. One even whispered, "This'll be good." Mr. Aldridge exhaled and stepped aside, now clearly indulging the moment as a joke. "By all means," he said, gesturing toward the front of the room with a theatrical sweep of his arm. "Enlighten us." Henry walked slowly to the front, each step measured and deliberate. He placed his old case gently on the piano bench, opened it with care, and lifted out the violin. It wasn't beautiful by traditional standards. The wood was darkened with age, worn smooth from use. There was no modern varnish or decorative trim, only character. Only time. But in Henry's hands, it looked sacred. Before we continue, if you believe that greatness can come from anyone, regardless of age, appearance, or background, make sure to subscribe. These stories reveal how quiet strength, lived experience, and unseen brilliance can turn the world upside down. And what happens next? You'll want to be here to witness it. Henry tucked the violin under his chin, raised his bow, and without a word, began to play. At first, the sound was soft, almost hesitant. A single note, drawn out, trembling, filled the space with something raw. And then, it grew. Note after note, layer after layer, the music poured out of him not with force, but with meaning. His fingers danced across the strings, but it wasn't technique on display. It was memory. Pain. Hope. History. The classroom changed. The boy who had laughed before leaned forward. A girl in the back lowered her phone, mesmerized. Even Aldridge, arms crossed, face tight, couldn't stop his eyes from narrowing. There was something unsettling about the way this man played. Something ancient. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't perfect. It was honest. More honest than anything he had heard from his most talented students. Henry played with the weight of someone who had lived through storms. Not just personal ones, but social, cultural, historical ones. You could hear the echoes in his phrasing, the grief in the vibrato, the quiet triumph in each rise and fall of the melody. And then, it happened, a change so subtle, so sudden, that no one was prepared for it. The mocking expressions faded. The tension in the room collapsed into silence. Even the most skeptical students couldn't look away. They were watching something rare, not just a performance, but a revelation. And when the final note hung in the air, trembling, then dissolved into the quiet, Henry opened his eyes, lowered his instrument, and turned. He didn't speak. He didn't wait for applause. He simply nodded, walked back to his case, and began to pack up his violin, the same way he had likely done 1,000 times before, in halls and rooms where he was seen or dismissed, welcomed or ignored. And for a moment, no one moved. Then a hand clapped, quietly, but steadily. One student. Then two. Then the entire room. All except Mr. Aldridge. He remained frozen. Not out of respect, but out of disbelief. This man, this nobody, this uninvited outsider, had walked into his classroom and stolen the entire air from the room. Not with bravado. Not with arrogance. But with truth. And Aldridge hated truth. Because it couldn't be graded. It couldn't be framed. It couldn't be filtered through prestige. Henry closed his case. He looked up one last time and met Aldridge's eyes. Not with defiance. Not with contempt. Just understanding. And that made it worse. He turned, walked out, and left behind a silence that no one in that classroom would forget. Not today. Not ever. Outside the classroom, the hallway echoed with Henry's slow footsteps. He didn't rush. He didn't glance back. The applause was still fading behind him, but it wasn't applause he came for. Inside, the silence had turned from reverent to restless. The students sat still, unsure of what to do now. For all their training, all their precision, none of them had been prepared for the raw emotion they had just witnessed. They were used to mastering music technically, but Henry had shown them something else entirely. Soul. Mr. Aldridge finally spoke, his voice forced and clipped. That was unexpected. A few students looked toward him, gauging his reaction, but his face betrayed his discomfort. He had lost control of the room, and worse, he had lost his certainty. For someone like Aldridge, that was unbearable. He wasn't even on the list, he added, as if trying to reassert some sort of authority. A girl in the front row turned slightly. He didn't need to be. Those 5 words said everything. And though Aldridge said nothing in return, his eyes narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but in realization. What Henry had done couldn't be undone. He hadn't just played a piece of music, he had exposed something. A hole in the way the class, and its teacher, saw mastery. Henry didn't come with a resume. He didn't come from prestige. He didn't even come from a known institution. But he came with something more powerful than all of that, truth born from experience. Later that evening, some of the students searched for his name online. Henry Bell, violinist, brought up a few scattered mentions: an old concert in the 70s, a jazz quartet photo in sepia tone, a wartime music program. Nothing glamorous. Nothing viral. But just enough to show them that he had been there all along, just not in the spotlight. One student, Michael, stayed late. He approached Aldridge after the session, still holding his violin. "Sir," he said hesitantly, "is Mr. Bell coming back?" Aldridge looked at him, then turned away. He shouldn't have been here in the first place. But Michael didn't leave. "I think, we all learned more from those 5 minutes than we did all week." That comment lingered in the air, weighty and unanswerable. Aldrich didn't respond. The next day, the conservatory buzzed with quiet chatter. Students spoke of the old man who played like he was speaking through the strings. A few professors murmured about it in the staff lounge. But by lunchtime, something unusual happened. A framed photo appeared on the wall just outside the classroom. It was old, grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. A younger Henry Bell, violin in hand, standing on a small stage surrounded by musicians of all backgrounds. No plaque. No announcement. Just a picture. Placed there by someone who thought he should be remembered, and by someone who maybe, silently, knew he had been wrong. As weeks passed, Henry didn't return. He didn't need to. His presence lingered not in memory, but in every note played differently after that day. Students began to approach music with less perfectionism and more honesty. Their sound changed. They sought meaning, not just mastery. And Aldrich? He never mentioned Henry again. But sometimes, after class, he would sit alone at the piano and play a slow, reflective tune, one hand on the keys, the other resting quietly on the wood. As if searching for something he hadn't yet found in himself. Because deep down, he knew, Henry hadn't just played a piece of music. He had played a mirror. And everyone, Aldrich included, had seen themselves in it. So when people asked later why that class played differently, felt differently, no one could quite explain it. But they all remembered the moment it changed. The day a man no one expected walked into a room full of experts, and showed them what music truly meant. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of someone who carries quiet greatness, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, real stories that prove talent, dignity, and truth can come from anywhere. Leave a comment below. Has someone ever surprised you with their brilliance when you least expected it? Sometimes, the world's greatest voices don't shout. They simply play, and let the silence do the rest.